Alrighty, so let's jump into this. Obviously, we had some technical difficulties there. We had hoped to do the interview with Kirk Haston as we always do with video. We were unable to do that, but we've got the next best thing here, doing a Skype call as a podcast, and so we're very excited to be joined by Kirk Haston. And I guess to start out, Kirk, obviously you have a book coming out. It'll be out in September, right? Is that when it comes out?
The last I heard, it may be August 15th. They're going back and forth on me on the release date, but somewhere in the fall time period.
Okay. So, and that book, the name of that book is Days of Night: How the General Changed My Life. And in the book, I guess, and you can tell us a little bit more about it, but you're basically going to go into, coming from Tennessee to Bloomington and the time that you spent at Indiana, which was obviously a really tumultuous time, and it coincided with my time at Indiana, actually, and obviously with the end of the Bob Knight era, the beginning of the Mike Davis era, and you were there for all of it. So kind of give us the broad overview of what the book's going to be about and why you decided to write it.
Yeah, I think that it's been a while since I think anybody that played for Coach Knight had written anything about, kind of how it was to play under him and to go through practices, and especially the time period that I was there was a particularly unique one. But I think it had been since Steve Alford's book that a player had kind of written something dealing with just kind of the everyday life and the process, the recruiting process, and just playing. And I tried to, when I was first telling people, when I was, I worked on it for probably about a year before I even told my wife I was working on it. We put the kids to bed at about 8 o'clock, and then I'd work on it from about 8:30 to 2 a.m. for several months in a row until I thought, well, maybe this is something. And I was just started telling a few people about, it's about 100 and 150 new Knight quotes that nobody's ever heard, and about 40 new Knight stories that probably nobody's ever heard. And I thought, if there's one thing that every Indiana player goes through when they first started playing for Coach Knight, or once they were even done, they was like, well, do you have any Coach Knight stories? Tell us some stuff about Coach Knight. So I kind of intertwined my story in and out of a lot of interactions with Coach Knight, and just tried and hope that your fans will enjoy it.
Yeah, Kirk, just a quick question about that. I know you're I was in school around the time that you were as well. I think our times overlapped a bit as well. And I know after having kids and being far enough removed from that, my memory is poor at best. So how did you capture all these things at the time that from that time that you were going through it, and how did you kind of look back and piece it all back together?
My memory is not the best in the world. I was very fortunate. My mom gave me some great advice a few days before I was leaving for college, my freshman year. She handed me a journal and said, you're going to want to remember what you go through and what you experience the next few years. You need to write this stuff down. And I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. I really hadn't thought about it. And so with that journal, and also with we have the famous red notebooks that we had to carry around everywhere that Coach Knight wanted us to have all the time. In the margins, I would write down things that he said, or stuff that had happened, or quotes that he had said, and then when I'd get home at night, I'd just write in this journal, some of the stories and some of the things that happened. So, and I luckily, during the course of a couple of moves in a couple of different states, had kept the notebooks and the journal, and just had a lot of that to rely on when I went back and looked at it. And the interesting thing about the notebooks was that Coach Knight was pretty famous for every now and then just picking up a notebook and checking it, making sure that, I guess that you weren't, writing love notes to your girlfriend or something, but, you wanted to make sure you were taking really good notes about game plans and everything. And so I was always fearful that, he would see that I wrote down in there that, Coach Knight said that, Jason Collier, that Madonna would regain her virginity the next time that Jason Collier would learn to use his left hand, and so I would write that in the margin, and I would write it, but I would write it really sloppy, kind of like shorthand, so I would know what it would say. But if Coach Knight saw it, he wouldn't be like, "What is he writing down while we're in the locker room?" So I wasn't writing it for any purposes other than just looking back and remembering it, but it did help piece some things together when I was writing the book.
Hey, Kirk, I recently interviewed for a class Brian Evans, and one quote that sticks with him that Knight said all the time, I'm just curious how many times he said it to you, don't complicate winning. Did he say that a lot? And do you have any other quotes that Knight, like little phrases that he said a lot that you kind of just, that kind of sticks with you now to this day?
Yeah, that was one of his, he would famously say that. There's a lot of them that come to mind. One of them was that he used to tell me a lot because he never could really remember that I was from Lobelville, Tennessee. And if you're from Lobelville, Tennessee, to be honest, who's going to really remember Lobelville, Tennessee? And it's a mouthful to say. So he just would call it Podunk, Tennessee, where I was from. And so anytime that I wasn't playing really good defense, he would just say to me, he'd be like, I didn't fly down to Podunk, Tennessee to bring you to Indiana to not play defense. And so he that was one of his go-tos with me. Another thing that he did with me that it was really funny to my teammates. It's more funny to me now than when it happened. But he came in one day, and luckily it was after a win. We had played well the night before, got a win. I'd had a pretty decent game, at least on the offensive end. And this was my sophomore year, I guess. So he comes in, doesn't say a word to anybody. We're sitting in the locker room with our notebooks on our lap, and Coach Knight walks in his, famous red, kind of rain suit gear looking thing that he would wear in games. And he went over to the dry erase board, and he wrote down a number that said 1-800 IMAPU, and then you could probably fill in the rest of the letters on the board. And he turned around and he pointed at the phone number that he wrote on the board, and he looked at me and he said, Kirk, if you want to play defense like you did last night, you need to call that number. That's a coach I'm not going to say the coach's name, but it was an ACC coach. He said that coach will take you all day long, and you can go play for him because that's the kind of defense he likes. So just call that number, and he'll be glad to take you. And he just walked out the room. And so it was that kind of stuff that I just absolutely loved about Coach Knight, that he just got his points across in a variety of different ways. Some of them, of course, was with some, with a little anger inside of it, but a lot of it was a lot of anger with some humor mixed in.
So you loved that kind of thing. Were there other guys that took that in another way and maybe got offended by it and didn't take it as constructive and took it more personally? Because it sounds like you were able to take the constructive parts of it.
Absolutely. It's one of the one of the chapters in the book deals with the most famous phrase that you heard when you first got to Indiana. When we always had a ton of past players coming in to talk to us, and every one of them, just about to a man, it just became almost like the Indiana motto was, when Coach Knight tells you something, listen to why he's telling you something, not how he's telling you something. And it's just great advice. And I took that to heart, and a lot of guys that were on the team at the time took that to heart. And some guys never could get past that. They could not get past the packaging and the delivery to understand the message. And I'm not saying that I agree. There's 95% of the stuff that Coach Knight would say to us, I completely understood where and what angle it was coming from. And then there was probably like 5% that I'm like, this is probably not doing anybody any good. But I mean, if that's the ratio for any coach, I mean, more power to you. That's a pretty good ratio, for just about any coach. I know I'm a high school coach now, and half the stuff I say probably doesn't mean anything. So I mean, if you're talking at a 95% success rate to your team and your players, I think that's pretty good. And that's the way that most of us that stuck around looked at it.
Well, shoot, we've been talking for 10 minutes, and you've already given us so many great anecdotes, and that's why I'm really excited for this book, and why I'm sure a lot of other folks are. And just about a half hour ago, I pre-ordered my copy. And for anybody listening, if you do want to get it, you can already pre-order the book on Amazon. If you go to assemblycall.com/Kirk, Kirk, it'll redirect you to the page on Amazon, and you can pre-order the book so that you get it once it comes out. And again, that's assemblycall.com/Kirk, Kirk. What's your relationship with Coach Knight like now?
I think that's pretty good. I mean, I probably stay in touch more with him through Miss Karen, his wife. I got to be really close with both of them, but I got to be really close with her, and she played a key part in my recruitment actually. But she's a little bit more apt to text back and forth, and Coach Knight doesn't seem to be as big a texter. And so like during basketball seasons and stuff, we'll correspond and talk about she'll ask about how my kids were doing and how the team is doing, and it was it was a bit of a nerve-wracking situation to go through, because I knew, and rightfully so, that Coach Knight and Miss Karen would probably be, because they're always dealing with negative stuff in the media and negative stuff and players and people saying bad stories about Coach Knight, and so once it looked like that this might be a possibility with this book, I sent them a rough draft, really early on, because I wanted to make sure that they were, that I had their blessing and everything. And once they read through it, and they felt comfortable with it, I felt comfortable enough to proceed and to seek out and see if anybody was interested in it. But I was, one of my favorite things is my granddad. Quick story. My granddad had lost. My granny passed away several years ago, and he ended up getting remarried to a fantastic lady, and it was about the same time that when my granddad got remarried at like the age of 83. Coach Knight was setting the win record at Texas Tech, and so the night after he set the record, I called him. And and Miss Karen, his wife, answered the phone, and I could hear there was a lot of people in the background. It sounded like they were having like a little celebration party after the record-setting win. And I just told her, I said, listen, I don't have to bother Coach. I just wanted to say congratulations. She said, no, he's right here. Let me put him on the phone. And I hadn't talked to him probably in 6 months. And he gets on the phone, and as Coach Knight is apt to do, he just no pleasantries, just straight to the point, like you're in the middle of a conversation when you get on with him every time. He gets on the phone, and before I can say anything, he goes, let me ask you a question, Kirk. And I said, okay. He said, did your granddad want to get married, or did he have to get married? And I was like, how does he even know that my granddad just got married? To this day, I have no idea, but that's, even in that moment, he was ready to, give my family and my granddad and me a little bit of a zinger when he could.
I got a question, I guess, just kind of about, about that relationship with him and with the school and things like that. I think, I've seen that you've been back to talk to the team within the last couple of years, I know, and there's all kind of the history between, Coach Knight and the university now at this point. Like, how do you reconcile all that? Because I think some people have had a challenge of separating Bob Knight from Indiana basketball and still being able to like and respect both and things like that. How do you, in your mind, how do you reconcile those couple things? Because both have been really important to you. We can, you can tell just from talking to you, but just how do you kind of bring that all together in your mind?
Yeah, there is unfortunately this chasm that's kind of there right now, and I fall in more of the AJ Guyton camp. I keep in touch with AJ really well and just think the world of him and drove up to see his induction into the IU Hall of Fame, which was one of the coolest things I've been able to watch. Anyhow, I really, we all would like to see, Coach Knight, reconcile and come back together with the university. I just don't think there's anything that anybody can do to help that along. And that's the frustrating part, is that every player that ever played for him could write him a letter, give him a call, say that we would be there at Assembly Hall in force, if he ever decided to come back. And it's just going to be one day that he wakes up and he's going to be like, I think that I would like to go back and just, see the new Assembly Hall. I mean, it's just going to be, it'll end as quickly as it started, and I hope that's at least my feeling at some point in time. But I can't speak for him at all for that. There was some pretty deep wounds there, especially with how they handled the firing. And I know that I don't think there's anybody that's left of that regime of board of trustees, or of course President Brand and all. That there's not really a whole lot of baggage that would still be there as far as he's concerned. But it's just there's a lot of hard feelings there. I mean, I've never seen the man as emotional as dealing with that speech that he did in front of the campus there, and also in the locker room that final night before he left Assembly Hall.
All right, well, let's circle back to the beginning of your relationship with Coach Knight. I'm sure there's a lot of longtime IU fans who probably wonder what it's like to be recruited to play basketball at IU by Bob Knight. And I did hear you tell part of the story on another podcast, the Keeping the Nostalgia Alive podcast. I thought it was a good story, the parts you shared on there. But I guess just can you talk a little bit about the recruitment process, how you ended up at IU, and what sold you on the Hoosiers and Coach Knight?
Yeah, I'd actually, I originally wanted to stay close to home, just being a only child and just kind of, I don't know, having it in my head that I just, I had to be close to home. It was one of those crutches I couldn't get off of for a long time. And then when things kind of fell through with going to Tennessee or Vanderbilt, I had to wait and push things to the later signing period. So that gave a little more time for the recruiting process to take place. And so actually, it was Coach O'Neill at the University of Tennessee at the time, Kevin O'Neill, that had been recruiting me, but they had too many commitments, and so they didn't have a scholarship available anymore. And so he had called Coach Knight and said, "I think that this kid that we were looking at that we liked would really fit with what y'all like to do, and you should take a look at him." So Coach Knight sent an assistant coach to Linden, Tennessee, to our high school to watch a practice, and I guess I passed that part of the test. And so Coach Knight told us that he was going to come to a game, and it was at Clifton, Tennessee. And if you think Lobelville, our county has two towns, Lobelville and Linden. If you think Lobelville and Linden's small, you need to go to Clifton. I mean, it's amazing. It's probably about 500 people. The gym at the time, they have a new gym now, but the gym at the time was like those old box seats. It was like probably, those old wood built-in seats that there's no folding of the bleachers, And so we're set to play at Clifton, Tennessee, and we know that Coach Knight's supposed to be coming, but we hadn't told anybody because in case he doesn't show. And so, our warm-ups start, and there's no sign of him at all. And we're in warm-ups, and, all of a sudden there's just this buzz in the crowd, and people start going in and out of the gym. And I'm like, I know what's going on, but my teammates are like, what's going on? And then one of my teammates, Blake Warren, who's still one of my good friends, but still a knucklehead, just starts while I'm trying to be focused for the upcoming game, my big audition for Coach Knight. He sees Coach Knight, and he starts running through layup line going, "Ooh, Coach Knight's here. Don't be nervous. Don't be nervous, Kurt. Coach Knight's here." And so that goes on for 10 minutes of warm-ups. And anyhow, the game goes pretty good. First half goes pretty good, and then I find out after the game I was looking to maybe meet him, that my high school coach tells me that he left at halftime. And I was like, well, I don't know, that might not be a good sign. I played pretty good, but coaches look at everything, how you run the floor, your hands. And I'm like, maybe I didn't pass the test at all. And so I go back to school the next day and just can't wait to hear, what Coach Knight has maybe called Coach Slatton. And they said, well, we hadn't heard anything. So I'm in the English class the next day, and Coach Slatton, my high school coach, comes gets me out of class. And anytime I can get out of English class, I was thrilled anyhow. But he got me out of class and said I had a phone call. And so I go into the office, the principal's office, and I pick up the phone, and true Coach Knight fashion, he's just in mid-conversation, no pleasantries or anything. He goes, "Kirk, I came last night, saw you play. I think you can play for us. I'd like for you to come here. What do you think?" And within 2 seconds, I just say, "Coach Knight, if you think that I can play for you, then I want to come play for you at Indiana." He said, "That sounds great. We'll send you the paperwork." And that was it. It was about a 3-minute conversation, 3-minute recruiting visit on the phone. I never went to Bloomington, never met him, never saw him face to face. It just that was it. And that signed, sealed, delivered. That was how I got to Indiana.
Wow. Do you know if he'd watched any tape or anything else?
We had Coach Slatton had sent them 2 game films before that, 2 or 3 game films, and then they came to one practice, and then Coach Knight and his wife came and watched the first half of that game against Clifton, the Clifton Lions. And they had one scout. They were looking at me and one other kid. I never did find out who the other kid was. And Coach Knight's wife, Miss Karen, she's a Hall of Fame girls basketball coach from Oklahoma. So he always respected her opinion basketball wise, and so she was the only person that had come with him on the recruiting trip. And he told me this later, and this is what kind of endeared me to Miss Karen and vice versa, I guess. He said that they were in the car going back to the little airport there near in Wayne County, and they were leaving the little gym, and he said, well, you'd seen. He's like, Karen, you've seen both of these kids. You know, which one? You like the other kid? You like this Tennessee kid? And she goes, I think you need to go with the Tennessee kid. And he goes, and that was kind of the tipping point. The famous Malcolm Gladwell tipping point was Miss Karen saying, go with the Tennessee kid. So that was I've always been thankful, and those words from Miss Karen, for lack of a better term, pretty much changed the course of my life for the better, I think.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you, Miss Karen. Changed all IU fans' lives for the better that you got to Bloomington. So I want to go back to something you said earlier, because I think there could be something interesting there. You talked about, obviously it was such a tumultuous time when Coach Knight got fired. It was obviously one of the most memorable times when I was on campus, and just one of the craziest. And I remember the speech that he gave at Dunn Meadow. But you were talking about, him getting emotional with the players. What was that like that night, and what did he say, and how was he different in that moment than you had seen him before?
Coach Knight just hardly. I had never really seen him show any kind of emotion. Seeing like getting even where close to welling up or anything like that. Just wasn't his style. Nothing bad or good about that. Just didn't ever see that from him or see that side of him. And it was just it was a very bizarre feeling in the locker room, just knowing, this is, and this kind of stuff maybe didn't hit us in the moment as much as it did in the coming weeks. It's like, you're sitting there and like, this is the last time that this legend is going to be in his locker room. And it's just a strange thing to think about. It's like, man, there was a tradition that he built on, but he really made the tradition what it had become. There was a history of basketball, of course, before him, but he really established a deeper tradition than what people had ever thought that the school could have had. And this is the last time that he's going to be surrounded by these four walls and these lockers where he's taught to, Isaiah Thomas and Calbert Chaney and Alan Henderson, and we just felt like that it wasn't on. It should be on his own accord to do something like that, and to have that basically this taken away from him, that was out of his control in a way. And a lot of people are going to argue the other side. I understand it. Say he was in complete control. He could have stopped this a long time ago, but all that being said, he went out on terms that was not his own, and it was just a sad deal. It was. It's very unusual to see a bunch of teenage, in early 20, boys be emotional about much of anything. But it was very emotional for all of us, and the assistant coaches included.
Yeah. We put together a series of the 50 Greatest Hoosiers, a list that you were on, of course. And what was really interesting about going through that series was seeing how players' careers overlapped. Which is always interesting. You think back to Jay Edwards and how if he had continued playing, he would have played with Calbert Chaney and just some of the great players that passed through together. And it's funny because talking to IU fans, I think your timeline is one of the ones that is forgotten or misremembered the most, because people remember you playing for Coach Knight, and of course they remember the big shot against Michigan State and Mike Davis's reaction after that. But a lot of people forget until you remind them that if you had stayed in school for your senior year, you would have been on that 2002 team that ended up going to the championship game. Do you ever, in your mind, do you have what-if thoughts about that? Because that season ended up being so great, and obviously, you would have added such a great element to that team. Do you ever think about that, or do you just not go there in your mind?
Well, I appreciate you waiting this long before you went to this deep, dark spot of my hat. No, it was. I'm telling you, you just don't know how many restless and sleepless nights I've had thinking about that. And it was ultimately a decision that I had to make more with my mind than my heart when I decided to leave, because, man, who wants to leave college and playing basketball at Indiana with the guys I was playing with? I mean, Dane Fife, Coverdale, Jared Jeffries, Moya, George, Odell. Those guys, I loved those guys. And Newton, it killed me to leave them, especially Dane, because when we were going through the process after Coach Knight got fired, he was really thinking about transferring, and I felt like I had a lot of long nights and a lot of conversations with him, just begging him, like, let's keep this thing together, because I felt like that if he left, he would be kind of linchpin, but anyhow, that year it was it's weird how, and that's one of the things that I kind of touch on a little bit, is that most people are interested in reading about people that had like great successes and then lost everything, or people that became superstars. And I'm nowhere close to either one. I'm kind of in between, where about for every good memory I have in basketball, then there's like a half a dozen just like heart-wrenching, like, oh man, what ifs and close calls. And just the karma gods, just kind of know what they're doing. I was actually in Indianapolis. It was like March 23rd, I think, was the night of the Kent State game that Indiana played. With the Elite Eight game. I'm pretty sure I have that right. Mm-hmm. I think it was March 23rd. I'm in Indianapolis. We're in town to play the Pacers. Of course, of all places in the NBA schedule, I have to be is in Indianapolis during this, And so me and my buddy, who's now at Vanderbilt down the road, thankfully, Bryce. The Elite Eight game between the Hoosiers and Kent State. And so I'm here with all these Hoosier fans and having to deal with, like, of course, a couple of Hoosier fans asking me and like, oh, you could be up there. I'm like, yeah, I'm trying to enjoy my chicken wings here, but thanks. I'm losing my appetite with every second. And so I'm in this weird, bizarro world of like really pulling for these guys to do great, because, I want to see Indiana do well. I want to see these guys that I love playing with do well. And then just kind of miserable that I'm going to have to deal with all the questions and all my, George Lynch was on the team at the time with the Hornets, and he was always giving me a hard time because he had a national title, and he was always like, man, Kirk, you could be in the Final Four right now. And so they, of course, win, and we play the Pacers the next night. We beat the Pacers. I think I played 45 seconds, something like that, my usual. And so we're in the locker room after the game, and, Baron Davis had a big game. Jamal Mashburn had a big game. It was a nice win. And all these TV cameras and people are around me asking me what it's like to not be playing in the Final Four. And it was just like, wow, we just had to be in Indianapolis. So that was it's something I've come to terms with. And who knows? They could have thrown it into me 2 or 3 times against Duke, and I could have missed 3 shots in a row and they'd gotten beat instead of, Hornsby hitting 2 threes. You just never know. I could have ruined the whole thing. But it is a great what if that you got to learn to live with and deal with when you're dealing with playing in sports and coaching sports.
So just a quick question for you on that decision to leave at that point. I mean, what were the key factors in the decision you made? And then maybe spin that forward a bit to this season to a guy like Thomas Bryant. How would you have advised him to go through the process and even just general thoughts on him already having made the decision to come back?
Yeah, I think that one thing that's a little bit different is that I'd already been in school for 4 years since I'd redshirted, and just kind of the longer you stay, the longer people kind of pick you apart and find reasons to not like you. And I kind of had the advantage of that year, my junior year, nobody was really looking at me in that way until I started playing the way I did my junior year. So I really didn't have that problem of being overanalyzed yet. But it basically came down to this. I went to the NBA draft camp in Chicago and had a great camp. Ended up being probably one of the, from the way that the press and everything, the rankings, I came out as one of the players that stock went up, one of those kind of things. And so I played well there. I was coming off a healthy year where I didn't have any injury. And so I was healthy. I was coming off a good year, and I had a good NBA pre-draft camp. And you just never know when you're a big white kid from a small town with a 27-inch vertical jump, if all those things are ever going to line up for you again to be able to be a potential first-round draft pick. So it was a family decision. It was a decision made just from a realistic standpoint, much more than a heart standpoint. And you always want to look back and be like, you'd like to have your cake and eat it too. And I'd love to have been a part of that. But the fact of the matter is I had a pretty significant back injury that put me on the injury list for a lot of my rookie year. And if, who knows, if I'd have had that same injury during my senior year at Indiana, then all of a sudden I'm a 21-year-old with coming out of college with back problems, and then all of a sudden you're a red flag and you don't get drafted at all. So it can break a million different ways. I wish it would have broken a little bit better and had a little bit better NBA career or a lot better NBA career. But that's just that's the breaks when it comes to this game.
All right, so now that Jared took you to the dark place, we'll go back to happier times and talk the Michigan State game. I think that's definitely a memory that stands out for everybody. Although I believe it was you who blocked wasn't it you who blocked that Frank Williams shot at the end of the Big Ten tournament game? I believe that stood out to me as well because I hated those Illinois teams. So even if that wasn't you, you should take credit for it. But
no,
I'm fairly certain that it was.
I appreciate you. That's one of my favorite memories because I just never could stand Illinois. I don't know if it was because I hated going to play at Illinois. I don't know if it's because they ripped off the Assembly Hall name or what it was, but that place was just dark and dreary, and I just hated playing there. And we always ran into just some tough teams. Illinois had some great players at the time, and getting that block to seal the win against Frank Williams was pretty sweet. We'd started off that year pretty mediocre and just picked up steam as the year went along. But anyhow, the Michigan State deal is kind of a strange deal too, because that was only the second time I'd ever taken a game-winning shot, and it was almost 2 years to the date that I think that Michigan State game was in February. And of course, in March, in my junior year in high school, I missed about a 6-foot jump shot that hit both sides of the rim and went out to lose a state title game. We lost by 1 point my junior year, and that was the first time I'd ever taken a game-winning shot in any game. And so, fast forward 2 years later, and that's the second shot I ever took to win a game was against Michigan State. And thankfully, I was in pretty big trouble underneath the dog pile until Coverdale started throwing people out of there and helped me up. I still owe Coverdale dinner for that. But he it's really a neat thing when I went back to talk to the team and had a chance to take my high school team to watch a practice in a game at Indiana. Coach Crean was nice enough to let us meet the team, and he asked me to say a few words, and that was really appreciated that. But he mentioned, that shot and being able to be a part of some of these other shots that has kind of, happened in the Assembly Hall in recent history is a pretty neat thing, a nice old bookmark in history to be a part of.
Well, Kirk, for what it's worth, it takes me to a deep, dark place remembering that shot because I missed that game, which is one of my biggest regrets of my college career, as I was not at that game. So,
man,
I know.
I recently had been in touch with Jeff Overton, plays on the PGA Tour, and because we would have overlapped. But I was talking about his recruiting process, and because he came in the year after I'd left, and we weren't there at the same time. But he told me that he said his official visit to Bloomington was that game, and so he was at that game.
Wow.
When that shot happened, and I was like, man, I'm glad that maybe helped hook you into becoming a Hoosier. But I get a lot of neat stories, and luckily probably it's equal for every time I get asked about what it was like not to be in the Final Four. Somebody will ask about that shot, so it balances out a little bit, I guess.
So any other moments from your college career that stand out, games or specific opponents that you really got up for outside of Illinois? I mean, obviously people know the Michigan State game, and we talked about that big block, and people ask you about 2002. But are there any other kind of underrated moments from your career that stand out to you when you think back on it?
I was trying to think. I just remember, and I never did have a great game against Kentucky, but I cannot get it across to people what that atmosphere was like to play that game, especially, when we were doing it at that point in time at the RCA Dome, and then you go to Freedom Hall, and just the feeling of just the half of the crowd in crimson and half of the crowd in blue, and just the atmosphere, and just I hope that regular season game gets back on the schedule. College basketball deserves that game, but I just remember that atmosphere. I remember Jamal McGlure and I were teammates with the Hornets, and he and I got in this big deal one time because we played against each other in one of these rivalry games, and I was telling him how I probably did this to him, and he was telling me how he did this to me, and so we looked it up on the internet how we both played, and I think I had 4 points and 3 rebounds and 4 fouls, and he had like 6 points and 3 rebounds. We both sucked, but we both, this was just because it was Kentucky, Indiana. We were ready to just go, even in the locker room, just would not back off of each other. That's the easy one. Probably the one, for some reason, I always liked, playing against Penn State. I didn't like playing against them. I always played well against them. But there was really nothing like in the Purdue rivalry games. Those were something that really your high school days when you're playing high school rivalry games, because it just the emotions that tied in, and just the interest in the student body for that game was just unsurpassed.
You obviously follow the team now, and you had a chance to go up there and talk with Coach Green. From your vantage point, how are things different, or how are they similar now to when they were there? Because, obviously a lot of people who are like us, a little bit older IU fans now, and especially the older generation of IU fans, like to lament how much different things are now than they were then. And obviously, Indiana's had a few lean years over the past 10 to 15 years, but it was nice to see the team obviously get back to playing Big Ten championship ball this year. But just in general, what's similar now about IU basketball, and what's different from the time you were there?
Well, I think it's not just with Indiana. It's just stylistically, the game is just so much different now than even just, it doesn't seem like a long time ago, but I guess to certain people it is. But when I was playing college basketball, just the, it's just the era of the dribble drive and the fast break 3-pointer and the dribble handoff. And it's so, it's so perimeter oriented. It was refreshing to see a big that has dominant capabilities like Bryant there now, and it's so unusual to see that now. I think that it's almost an advantage. It's almost a throwback to like, oh, we've got to guard a big guy. But it's such and I think that as far as Crean is concerned, I know that it's just so tough these days. As soon as you hit a bad patch, there's 5 new Twitter handles out there, firecrean.com stuff, that's floating around, and just to have a team, persevere this year, through the Blackman injury, and to be able to put another banner up. I was really proud as a Hoosier fan to see at least that stepping stone of fighting through it. They could have just really that team could have folded numerous times, and a lot of that goes on Yogi's shoulders as well. I mean, I just what an incredible career that guy had. I mean, I hope he doesn't have to ever buy another mill anywhere in the state of Indiana, because that guy put in a career and really turned himself into a defensive player that I don't think any of us thought that he was going to be capable of when he first came in. So I just think that Crean is, I think, what is he, 8 years in now, going on 9 maybe. I think that you're seeing I think stability is so key in programs, and I'm glad that the rug wasn't pulled out from under him too quick. But I hope that we're continue on in this direction.
I appreciate your perspective on this, and we actually have a book coming out, kind of celebrating this season. It's going to be called Better Than Advertised. And I think, it gets lost for people a little bit. Yes, the team was top 15 at the start of the year, and people expected them to compete for a Big Ten title, and that's what they did. But the journey was so much different than people expected. And maybe you can lend a little bit of insight on that. I mean, you lose a guy like Blackman. You struggle out of the gates in Maui, have that horrible game against Duke. And so how important was it for them to battle back, and how impressive of an accomplishment was that? Because you have a lot of people who say, well, they were supposed to be top 15 as it was, and that's what they ended up being in Sweet 16. So, I don't want to give them extra credit for doing what they were supposed to do. But yet, we believe, and it sounds like you believe too, that the season was about a lot more than that, and that the context was so important, not just the beginning point and the end point.
Well, the first comparison that comes to mind was that second year that the Heat were together, and they went. I think it was the second year. They'd lost the finals the first year, and then they're down 3-2, and they go to Boston. And I remember, I loved how that, I can't remember, it may have been Dan Le Batard or somebody, but they framed it like they were basically saying the blueprint was on the line with that game at Boston for those that Heat team. If they lose that game, the whole thing gets reset. The whole thing, breaks down. And I really felt like this year that the blueprint was on the line. It was just like, if this had been a disaster year, and it could have easily gone that way with the Blackman injury and that just disastrous Duke game. If it had just shattered from that point on, where would we be right now? A new coach, a new system, losing recruits. Then another 3 or 4 years of building back up, and that would just been miserable, I think, for Hoosier fans, and even for diehard people they're diehard against Cream. They would just been like, that's just, you don't want to see your program go through that. So it just stabilized everything. It saved the blueprint. It just kind of said, listen, this is. There's something here besides, just a few recruits. This was a team. They showed that they were a team, not just talent. And many times to us, that talent was the most, bleeping overused phrase in America. He wanted, it was just about chemistry and team. And I don't know, that I was proud to see them make something of this season that could have, really, been, it could have been an NIT berth after the Duke game, and everybody would have thought that was something that was on the table, and it ended up being a chance at making the Elite Eight.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I think that's a good one to think about. So you're the high school basketball coach at Perry County now. So how would you describe your coaching style, and how do you think your time with Coach Knight influenced that? And then maybe how would your players say your time with Coach Knight influenced that?
Well, I would say that my language is quite a bit different than Coach Knight. But I would say that we do a lot of motion offense type stuff. The one thing that I've realized quickly in high school, you've really got to, since I don't have any control over the types of players that I'm really getting, you really have to be able to adapt defensively. I know I catch some grief from our district coaches and some other people that I coach against when we play. We had to play a lot of zone this year because we were pretty big and we weren't very deep. So I needed to protect guys from getting in foul trouble, and I just, I really had a hard time matching up with we have a lot of guard dominant teams in our district, so we were playing 2 or 3 bigs, and we just couldn't match up man to man. So I catch some grief. They're like, "What did Coach not think about you playing all this zone?" And so that's one thing that's quite a bit different than probably what Coach Knight would do. But we play a little bit more zone than he probably would agree with. But probably the number one thing I learned and is able to carry over and really implement is I learned a ton in film, watching how Coach Knight analyzed film and how the assistant coaches analyze film and the detail and just the stuff that you can learn. And we do a lot of film work. I don't really know what other high schools do, but I think that we do as much, if not more, than most high schools, and try to learn a lot from film work, from practice, and from games.
All right, so have you, maybe the next question, this is a whole nother level of excitement, but I often talk about here about coaching my kids' teams. Have you found yourself in that situation at all in any little league or basketball, any of those kinds of things yet, or do you prefer in those situations just stay on the sidelines and enjoy watching?
No, I do have a rule since I do head coaching during the year is I will not do any head coaching of any baseball or basketball juniors or Dixie youth. But I will do assistant coaching. So I'm assistant coach on both of my son's baseball teams, and I probably don't need to have you probably need to interview my 5-year-old son because after his last game he said after he missed a ground ball and he came at we got back home and he said, if I miss a ball it kind of bothers me if I look over and see you looking at me. So I'm like, oh, this is where we're at. So I've tried not to make eye contact after my son makes mistakes. So I'm trying to navigate that as easily and smoothly as possible. I don't know when they get to high school how I'm going to handle or if I'm going to be able to handle coaching them as a head coach. We'll see how that goes.
All right. Good luck. I know the feeling. My daughter came to the sidelines at halftime of a basketball game this year. She's 8, and she had tears in her eyes because she knew she had done something that we had worked on in practice defensively. She did the opposite. So I know what you mean. It's not a good feeling to know that they've listened to you and they know that they did something wrong, but also it doesn't make you feel good that they feel that bad about it. So I feel your pain there.
Yeah. They're at least showing a little concern.
Yeah, that's good. It shows they care, so that's a positive. All right, so I got a few kind of rapid fire things here, and then we'll wrap it up. Although I feel like we've been kind of having a chat alongside here. We could probably keep you on here all night if we wanted, or maybe just we both contemplated just hopping in the car and driving to Tennessee to meet you for a beer. But all right, so a few quick rapid fire things. So as far as teammates, you can interpret memorable in this case to be whatever you want it to be. Give me one or two of your most memorable teammates and why.
I would say that Tom Geyer is up on that list. He was my first roommate, and he was a walk-on, and I just was always impressed by him. He wore hearing aids, and he was more than partially deaf in both ears and wore hearing aids, and just didn't let that deter him from going after a dream of playing Indiana basketball playing college basketball for the Hoosiers. So I always admired him for that, but he was always one of my favorites.
All right. Best piece of advice you got from Coach Knight during your time at IU?
Well, he told me my freshman year that he brought me there to he brought me there to make sure that I play. He wanted me to play basketball and do well, but the number one thing was to get an education and to go to class. And then 3 years later, we were in a practice, and he said, "Gee, Kirk, I didn't bring you here to be a doctor. I brought you here to be a basketball player." And so at some point in that time period, he changed his tune on what I needed to focus on. So I started focusing a little bit more on my defense at that point.
There you go. All right. So as part of getting ready for this, I was looking through your Twitter feed a little bit, and so I found at some point in there a picture that was apparently some kind of Hornets promotion that had you, some combination, I think is you, Baron Davis, Eldon Campbell, and Ric Flair. Give any background. This doesn't have to be a rapid fire answer because I'm sure this is a good story, but give me the background of how that came to be and how that all turned out.
Yeah, that sounds like the beginning of like two rabbis walking to a joint or something, doesn't it? Yeah, I don't know how we ended up there. It was a local commercial that they were doing, and I've always been a big wrestling fan. I don't keep up as much now, but in college we always got together for all the pay-per-views, and me and some of the managers on the team went to Louisville for Judgment Day, WWF. It was still WWF back then, and to see the Undertaker's return and everything. But I was a big Rock fan. But anyhow, when they said that they had a chance to be in a commercial with Ric Flair, I was like, "Are you kidding me? I've got to touch one of these robes. I got to get close enough to one of these robes, And so we're there and we're shooting, for like 2 hours. And basically me and Eldon Campbell, all we do is walk into the foreground after Baron Davis is showing Ric Flair how to properly, dunk, and Ric Flair is trying to show Baron Davis how to properly go woo after he's dunked. And so we don't have any lines or anything, but we just walk in the foreground and just look at each other and kind of shake our heads and just keep walking. And we worked on it forever. And I was like, man, that's awesome. I'm going to be in a commercial with Baron Davis and Eldon Campbell and Ric Flair. So the season started, and I'm watching, television, and local television, and the commercial pops up. Me and Elder Campbell completely cut out of the commercial. Just Baron Davis and Ric Flair going woo for 30 straight seconds. And so I was like, man, I didn't get in the commercial. So at least I got my picture taken with him.
That's awesome.
There are no real good segues from Baron Davis and Ric Flair going woo that relate back to IU basketball. However, the only one I can think of is, when Andy asked you who your most memorable teammate was, I'm sure not a lot of people expected Tom Geyer, although your reasoning for that was terrific. But I want to ask you about A.J. Moya, because he's obviously one of the most memorable Hoosiers from that era of IU basketball, and you were a junior when he was a freshman. What was he like to play with? Because he was such just a ball of fire and energy when he was out there. Was he like that all the time?
He was. I loved when we got, he was just one of those guys, whether we were in the summer playing pickup or you were in scrimmages, you wanted to see Moya's name listed around yours and on the same team. You wanted him being on the same color jersey as you were, because he just played with this energy and this excitement and just this like this like kid playfulness of like, the game was just fun to him. Like everything about the game was fun, and he just, I love that, like, AJ Gotten was always real stoic, and that's great. I don't have any problem with that. But I always liked how Moya just kind of, you could see exactly how he felt and how the game was going by just looking at his face. You didn't have to see anything else. He was going to let you know how great or bad life was for him at that moment. And who doesn't want an emotional, presence like that on your team? And the one thing I always liked about him, my least favorite teammates, which is probably a more interesting podcast and one that would get me more in trouble, but were the ones that it was never their fault. It was always, you were supposed to throw the pass here. Why didn't you do that? It was always, kind of pushed on somebody else why they failed. And Moya was never in that camp. It was always, he was always self-aware enough to know, when he made a mistake and know, when it was hit. He owned everything, whether it was good or bad. And those are my favorite kind of players to play with, are the ones that you didn't have to walk on eggshells, and the ones that really took ownership of the mistakes as well as wanting to share with the success.
Yeah, it would be interesting to know who some of those teammates were, but we don't want to get you in trouble, so we won't go down with that line of questioning. But one of the last questions I want to ask you, when I think back to that era of IU basketball, there were a lot of really good individual players, and I feel like I always end up in conversations with people about how guys from that era are underrated. And I feel like a lot of that is because obviously the team didn't have a lot of tournament success there toward the end of Coach Knight's run. And then obviously everything that happened with his dismissal and then Mike Davis taking over and all of that, it really kind of overshadowed some of that. And one guy that to me falls into that, and again, I think a lot of guys do, but Jared Jeffries. And, a guy who came in as a really highly rated recruit, and almost to the point where it's like unless he was first-team All-American Player of the Year, he wasn't going to be able to do enough to live up to it. And yet he was still terrific and played great, and obviously was the leader and the catalyst of that 2002 team. And again, like Moya, because they were recruits together, you played with him. What was Jared like as a player and as a teammate?
JJ really, he really does deserve a special, special section or being. He should be mentioned up there with some of the greats. I mean, he probably. I think that he probably could have been a better. He probably could have brought more attention to himself if he'd been a little bit more of a selfish player, and that just really wasn't his nature. He's a very unselfish player, and I think that was one of the reasons why that 2002 team was so great. But he never was really one to bring a lot of attention to himself. I'll never forget playing against him his freshman year coming in, and just like he looked skinny. At first, and of course he built up and got much stronger in the next couple of years. But when he first came in, he looked skinny. I could not believe how hard it was to move him in the post. He had the strongest legs. It was amazing how, and if you go back and watch game film of him, one of the things you'll notice immediately is just how he was able to move people in the post that you didn't think that he should be able to move. He had such leg strength. The person I was comparing to when I played in And with the Hornets, I was there when David West came in, and West was the same way, and you can kind of see that still today. David West and him were very similar in the post of trying to move it. You just couldn't move them. It was impressive, but just a high character guy, and just somebody that was really a glue guy on the team. I mean, people wanted to be around him, and he was somebody that brought people together, and that's something that's always good for team chemistry.
Yeah, well, and when one of your most talented players is also a glue guy, that's huge just for the team, for what they can do.
Yeah.
So for my last question, I don't want to take you to a deep, dark place with this question, but it's the last question I had planned on asking you, and I don't want to put you on the spot either. But one of the drawbacks of leaving school early is that you don't get that special moment where you get to give a senior speech, which is I'm sure regrettable for the player, one of those things that you'd love to do, and obviously as fans, we love those moments. And I know as a fan, we were all so happy this year that Yogi came back and that we got to have that moment with him. What do you think you would have said if you had a chance to have a senior speech and address IU fans, kind of thinking back to Kirk Haston back then in 2002? What do you think you would have said in that moment?
That's a really good question. Every time that I come across, there's a photograph, and I think it may be Cody Zeller's, like one of his background pages. But there's like a page of him with a shot from behind. It just has you can see the crowd when he's at senior night, or there's like a crowd in the background. I just the number one thing was just to make sure that I got the point across that I would not be standing on the Assembly Hall's court, and if it wasn't for my mom and my granddad getting me into so many gyms my entire life. And one of my granddad has been he was a college coach and at Freed-Hardeman University, and he was my personal coach forever. But one of the things that he kind of got across to me early on was that the more time that you spend dribbling, shooting, working in dimly lit gyms by yourself, when you stop dribbling the ball, the only thing you can hear is your own breath. The more time that you spend and are willing to spend in quiet, dark, dank gyms by yourself, the better chance you have of one day playing in places that are loud and packed like Assembly Hall. And that I just try to get that point across all the time to my own kids, but that's probably what I would have said, that night if I'd had a chance.
Man, Kirk, this has been wonderful. Like Andy said, we could probably spend another hour talking. And so if you're up for it, maybe when the book comes out, we'll have you on again. I feel like we just scratched the surface of so many different topics and things that we could talk about. But the book is called Days of Night, How the General Changed My Life. Again, you can go to assemblycall.com/Kirk, and that'll redirect you to the Amazon page where you can pre-order the book. I've got my copy coming. I can't wait to read it. Good luck with the launch. Good luck with your coaching, Kirk. And, man, thank you so much for taking the time with us tonight. This was great.
Sure thing. Really appreciate y'all having me on.
Yep. All right, we'll talk to you soon, Kirk.
All right, thanks, man.
Yep.